The key didn't fit. Ethan stood on the porch of his childhood home in Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, his breath catching as he twisted the metal uselessly in the lock. 7 years gone, and the house he'd dreamed of returning to had shut him out before he could even knock. He stepped back, the faded welcome mat crunching under his boots. The air smelled of damp leaves and distant rain, the kind of autumn evening that used to mean family dinners and his mother's laughter echoing from the kitchen. Now, the house looked different. New shutters, a repainted door, and a lock that didn't recognize him. His fingers trembled as he shoved the key back into his pocket, his heart hammering with a question he wasn't ready to face. Did they change the locks to keep me out? Ethan was 26 now, lean and weathered from years in San Francisco, where he'd built a life he was proud of, a life where he could love who he wanted. But Willow Creek was a different world, a small town where whispers traveled faster than truth. 7 years ago, he'd left in the dead of night, his father's words ringing in his ears. "You're no son of mine if you choose that path." He'd been 19, scared, and certain he'd never come back. Yet here he was, drawn by a letter from his younger sister, Lila, tucked in his backpack. "Dad's sick, Ethan. He's asking for you. Please come home." The porch light flickered on, snapping him out of his thoughts. The front door creaked open, and there she was, Lila, now 16, her dark curls spilling over a flannel jacket. Her eyes widened, then softened, and before Ethan could speak, she launched herself into his arms. "You're here," she whispered, her voice thick with relief. "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," Ethan admitted, hugging her tightly. Her warmth was a lifeline, grounding him against the ache of standing on a porch that no longer felt like his. "The locks." Lila pulled back, her face clouding. "Yeah, Dad had them changed a couple years ago. Said it was for safety." She hesitated, her gaze dropping. "But I think it was about you." Ethan's stomach twisted. He'd prepared for this, or so he thought. 7 years of silence, of unanswered letters and calls that went to voicemail, had hardened him. But standing here, in the shadow of his old life, the rejection stung fresh. "Is he his dad really asking for me?" he asked, voice low. Lila nodded, but her expression was guarded. "He's different now, Ethan. Sicker, yeah, but softer maybe. I don't know. Mom's been weird too. They don't talk about you, but I hear them whispering sometimes." She grabbed his hand, tugging him toward the door. "Come inside. They don't know you're coming." He froze. "Lila, I can't just walk in. What if? They're your family," she cut in, fierce. "And I'm not letting you stand out here like a stranger." She pushed the door open wider, and the familiar scent of cedar and old books hit him, pulling him back to 1,000 memories he'd tried to bury. Inside, the living room was both familiar and foreign. The same worn couch, the same framed photo of him and Lila as kids on the mantel, but new curtains, new rugs, a new sense of distance. His mother, Diane, stood in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel in her hands. Her eyes locked on Ethan, and for a moment, time stopped. Then her face crumpled, a mix of shock and something softer, regret, maybe. "Ethan." Her voice was barely a whisper, like she was afraid saying his name would make him disappear. "Hey, Mom," he said, his throat tight. He wanted to run to her, to hug her like he used to, but his feet stayed rooted. The weight of 7 years hung between them, heavy with unspoken words. Diane took a step forward, then stopped as heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway. Ethan's father, Robert, appeared, leaning on a cane, his once robust frame gaunt from illness. His eyes, sharp despite the fatigue, fixed on Ethan. The room went silent, the air thick with tension. "You're here," Robert said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Didn't think you'd show." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Lila said you were asking for me." Robert's gaze flickered to Lila, then back to Ethan. "I was. Doesn't mean I'm ready for this." He turned, shuffling back toward the hallway. "Dinner's in an hour. You staying?" It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't a rejection either. Ethan nodded, his chest tight. "Yeah, I'm staying." As Robert disappeared, Diane crossed the room, her hands trembling as she reached for Ethan. "I'm sorry about the locks," she whispered, pulling him into a hug. "I didn't know how to find you. I didn't know if you wanted to be found." Ethan let himself sink into her embrace. the warmth of it both comforting and painful. He'd come back expecting a fight, but this quiet, fractured welcome was harder to navigate. Lila squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with hope, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this house, this family, was a puzzle he no longer fit into. Dinner was tense, the clink of forks against plates the only sound for long stretches. Robert sat at the head of the table, his breathing labored, his eyes avoiding Ethan's. Diane tried to fill the silence with small talk about the town's new library, Lila's art classes, but it felt forced, like a bandage over a wound that hadn't healed. "So," Robert finally said, setting down his fork, "San Francisco. You happy there?" Ethan hesitated. The question felt like a trap, but there was no venom in Robert's tone, just a cautious curiosity. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I've got a good job, friends, a life, and a boyfriend." Robert's voice was flat, but the word hit like a stone. Ethan's grip tightened on his glass. "Yeah, his name's Caleb. He's important to me." The table went still. Lila shot Ethan an encouraging look, but Diane stared at her plate, and Robert's jaw worked silently. Ethan braced for the explosion, the same one that had driven him out 7 years ago. But Robert just nodded, his eyes distant. "Good to know," he said, and went back to his food. Ethan exhaled, his heart racing. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. For now, that was enough. After dinner, Lila dragged Ethan to her room, a chaotic mix of sketchbooks and fairy lights. "I missed you," she said, flopping onto her bed. "It's been weird without you. Dad's been sick for a while, lung cancer. He's in treatment, but it's rough. I think that's why he's asking for you. He's scared." Ethan sat beside her, the weight of her words settling in. Scared of what? Of dying. Of leaving things unfinished. Lila's voice cracked. "I think he regrets what happened, Ethan. But he's too stubborn to say it." Ethan stared at the ceiling, memories flooding back. His father's anger, his mother's tears, the night he'd left with nothing but a backpack and a broken heart. He'd spent years building armor against this place, but now, sitting in Lila's room, he felt it cracking. "I don't know if I can do this, Lila," he admitted. "Being here, it's like walking on glass." She grabbed his hand. "You don't have to do it alone. I'm here. And maybe they're trying, in their own way." Ethan wanted to believe her, but the new locks on the door told a different story. As he lay on the guest room couch that night, the house creaking around him, he wondered if coming back had been a mistake, or if it was his last chance to mend what had been broken. The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of coffee and the distant clatter of dishes. For a moment, he was 16 again, sprawled on this same couch after a late-night movie marathon with Lila. Then reality crashed in. The locks, his father's guarded stare, the weight of 7 years. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and found Diane in the kitchen, her hands busy with pancake batter. "You're up," she said, her smile fragile but warm. "I thought maybe you'd like some breakfast. Like old times." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "Thanks, Mom." He slid onto a stool at the counter, watching her work. Her hands, once steady, now trembled slightly, and her hair was streaked with gray he didn't remember. Time had changed her, just as it had changed him. "Lila's still asleep," Diane said, flipping a pancake. "She's been up late sketching lately. Says it helps her think." She paused, her voice softening. "She's missed you, Ethan. We all have." Ethan wanted to believe her, but the words felt hollow against the memory of silence. "You didn't call," he said quietly. "Not once in 7 years." Diane's hand stilled. She set the spatula down, her eyes glistening. "I wanted to. Every day, I wanted to. But your father, he was so angry, and I didn't know how to reach you without making it worse. I thought you'd moved on, that you didn't want us anymore." Ethan's chest ached. "I never stopped wanting you," he said, his voice breaking. "I just didn't know how to come back." Diane reached across the counter, her hand covering his. "You're here now," she whispered. "That's what matters." The moment was broken by Robert's slow footsteps. He shuffled into the kitchen, his cane tapping the floor, and sat at the table without a word. Ethan tensed, waiting for another loaded question, but Robert just sipped his coffee, his eyes fixed on the window. "I've got a doctor's appointment today," Robert said finally, his voice rough. "Lila usually comes. You can too, if you want." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. It wasn't an olive branch, not exactly, but it was something. "Yeah," he said. "I'll come." The hospital was a 40-minute drive, through rolling hills and fading farmland. Lila chattered in the back seat, filling the silence with stories about school and her art, but Ethan felt the tension between him and Robert like a taut wire. At the clinic, they sat in a sterile waiting room, the air thick with antiseptic and unspoken words. Robert was called in for his appointment, leaving Ethan and Lila alone. "He's trying," Lila said, her voice low. "He doesn't say it, but I can tell. He kept your old baseball trophy, you know? It's still in his office." Ethan's heart twisted. He'd left that trophy behind, along with everything else, when he'd fled. The thought of his father keeping it, even after everything, was both painful and hopeful. When Robert returned, his face was pale, his steps slower. "Chemo's kicking my ass," he muttered, sinking into a chair. "But they say it's working. For now." Ethan wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he helped Robert to the car, his hand steady on his father's arm. It was the first time they'd touched in years, and it felt like a bridge, fragile but real. Back at the house, Ethan wandered into the backyard, where he used to play catch with Robert. The old oak tree still stood, its branches heavy with leaves. He was startled when Robert joined him, leaning on his cane. "You remember that summer you hit your first home run?" Robert asked, his voice gruff. "I was so damn proud." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I remember." Robert looked away, his jaw working. "I wasn't proud when you left. I was angry, scared, didn't know how to handle it." Ethan's heart pounded. "Handle what?" "Me being gay." Robert flinched, but he didn't look away. "Yeah, I thought it was wrong. Thought I could fix you. But I was the one who was wrong." The words hit Ethan like a punch. He'd waited years for this, but now that it was here, he didn't know how to feel. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. "All those years, you just shut me out." Robert's eyes glistened. "I didn't know how to take it back. Still don't. But I'm trying, Ethan. I'm trying." Ethan nodded, his vision blurring. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As they stood under the oak tree, the first raindrops fell, soft and tentative, like the beginning of something new. The rain came harder that afternoon, drumming against the roof as Ethan sat in the living room, a photo album open on his lap. Lila had dug it out from a closet, her eyes bright with mischief. "You need to see how dorky you looked in high school," she teased, but Ethan knew she was trying to rebuild something, memories, maybe, or trust. The pages were filled with moments he'd tried to forget. Him in a too-big baseball uniform, Lila as a toddler smearing cake on his face, his parents smiling at a 4th of July picnic. Each photo was a shard of a life he'd left behind, sharp with nostalgia and regret. He paused at a picture of him and his father at a fishing trip, both grinning, the lake sparkling behind them. He barely recognized the boy he'd been, or the man his father was now. Diane joined him, sitting on the couch with a mug of tea. "You were always so serious," she said, pointing to a photo of Ethan at 12, frowning at a science fair project. "Even then, you carried the world on your shoulders." Ethan managed a small smile. "Guess I haven't changed much." She touched his arm, her voice soft. "You've changed more than you think. You're stronger now, braver." He wanted to believe her, but the weight of the past still pressed against him. "I don't feel brave," he admitted. "Coming back here, it's like stepping into a minefield." Diane's eyes softened. "We made mistakes, Ethan. Your father and we didn't know how to handle things. But we never stopped loving you." Ethan closed the album, his throat tight. "Love didn't feel like silence, Mom. It didn't feel like new locks." She flinched, but before she could respond, the front door opened, and a stranger walked in, a man in his 30s, broad-shouldered, with a warm smile and a bag of groceries. "Hey, Diane, I got the stuff for dinner," he called, then stopped when he saw Ethan. "Oh, you must be Ethan." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Yeah, and you are?" "Mark," the man said, extending a hand. "I'm a friend of the family. Lila's told me a lot about you." Ethan shook his hand, but his mind raced. A friend? The way Mark moved comfortably through the house, the way Diane smiled at him, suggested more. Was this why the locks had changed? Had his family replaced him with someone new? Lila bounded downstairs, breaking the tension. Mark's the best, she said, grabbing a soda from his bag. He's been helping out since Dad got sick. Teaches at my school, too. Ethan nodded, forcing a smile. Mark seemed kind, but his presence felt like another layer of distance between Ethan and his family. As they prepared dinner, Ethan watched Mark joke with Lila, help Diane chop vegetables, even exchange a quiet word with Robert. It was a rhythm Ethan didn't know, a family he wasn't part of. At dinner, the conversation flowed easier than the night before, but Ethan felt like an outsider looking in. Mark asked about San Francisco, and Ethan answered carefully, mentioning his job as a graphic designer but avoiding Caleb. He wasn't ready to share that part of himself here, not yet. After dinner, Ethan slipped outside, needing air. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and sharp. He sat on the porch steps, staring at the stars, when Mark joined him. "Must be weird, coming back," Mark said, sitting beside him. "Lila says you've been gone a long time." "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice clipped. "Feels longer." Mark nodded, unfazed. "I get it. I grew up in a town like this. Left when I was 18, didn't come back for years. My folks weren't thrilled about me being bi, either." Ethan's head snapped up. "You're?" "Yep." Mark grinned, but there was a weight in his eyes. "Took my family a while to come around. Still working on it with my dad. But they're trying, and that's something." Ethan didn't know what to say. Mark's openness caught him off guard, stirring a mix of envy and hope. "My dad's not the trying type," he said finally. "Or at least, he didn't used to be." "He's changed," Mark said. "Not all the way, but enough. Give him time." Ethan wanted to argue, but the sincerity in Mark's voice stopped him. Maybe time was what they all needed. Time to heal, to understand, to rebuild. As Mark went back inside, Ethan stayed on the porch, the stars brighter now. He thought of Caleb, waiting for him in San Francisco, and felt a pang of longing. But for the first time, he also felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find a place here again. The next day, Ethan offered to drive Lila to school, craving a moment away from the house's heavy air. The high school was just as he remembered, red brick, faded banners, kids spilling out of buses. Lila pointed out her art room, her voice bubbling with excitement. "You should see my latest project," she said. "It's a mural about family. I kinda included you." Ethan's heart skipped. "Me?" "Yeah." She blushed. "It's not done yet, but I wanted you in it. You're part of us, even if you're far away." He pulled her into a quick hug before she darted off, her backpack bouncing. Driving back, Ethan felt lighter, Lila's words a small anchor in the storm of his emotions. But the lightness faded when he saw Robert in the garage, tinkering with an old radio. "Need a hand?" Ethan asked, stepping inside. The garage smelled of oil and sawdust, a time capsule of his father's hobbies. Robert grunted, not looking up. "You never cared much for fixing things." Ethan bristled but kept his tone even. "I cared about spending time with you." Robert's hands stilled, the screwdriver hovering over the radio. "Didn't seem like it when you left." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because you told me I wasn't your son anymore." The words hung heavy, raw. Robert set the screwdriver down, his shoulders slumping. "I was wrong," he said, so quiet Ethan almost missed it. "I didn't understand. Thought I was protecting you. Or hell, I don't know what I thought." Ethan's throat burned. "You broke me, Dad. Do you get that? I was 19, and you made me feel like I was nothing." Robert's eyes met his, red-rimmed and tired. "I know. And I'm sorry, Ethan. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm sorry." The apology was a crack in the wall between them, small but real. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. They worked on the radio in silence, the clink of tools a fragile bridge. That evening, Ethan called Caleb, needing his voice. "It's weird here," he said, pacing the guest room. "Dad apologized, but it's not enough, you know?" Caleb's voice was warm, steady. "It's a start. You don't have to fix everything at once. Just take it one day at a time." Ethan smiled, missing Caleb's calm presence. "I wish you were here." "Me too. But you've got this, Ethan. You're stronger than you think." The call ended, but Caleb's words lingered, giving Ethan the courage to face another day. At breakfast, Diane suggested a family outing to the town fair, a tradition Ethan remembered fondly. He agreed, hoping it might ease the tension. The fair was alive with lights and laughter, the air thick with the smell of popcorn and cotton candy. Lila dragged Ethan to the Ferris wheel, her excitement infectious. As they rose above the town, the lights sparkling below, Ethan felt a flicker of the boy he'd been, hopeful, connected. But the moment shattered when he overheard a group of locals whispering nearby, their eyes on him. "That's the Miller kid, right? The one who you know." The word stung, a reminder of why he'd left. Robert noticed, his face hardening. To Ethan's shock, he stepped toward the group, his voice firm. "That's my son you're talking about. Mind your own business." The locals scattered, and Ethan stared at his father, stunned. Robert didn't meet his eyes, just muttered, "Let's get some food," and walked off. But the gesture, small as it was, felt like a shield, one Ethan hadn't expected. As they ate, Lila chattered about the mural, Diane smiled, and Robert even laughed once, a sound Ethan hadn't heard in years. For a moment, they were a family again, fragile but real. But Ethan knew the road ahead was long, and the whispers of Willow Creek wouldn't fade easily. The fair's glow lingered in Ethan's mind as they drove home, but the warmth faded when they pulled into the driveway. A neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, stood on her porch, her eyes narrowing as Ethan stepped out of the car. "Heard you were back," she called, her voice sharp. "Hope you're not stirring up trouble." Ethan's stomach clenched, but before he could respond, Lila snapped. "He's not the one causing trouble, Mrs. Callahan." She grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him inside. "She's always been like that," Lila muttered, slamming the door. "Thinks she knows everything." Ethan forced a smile, but the encounter left a bitter taste. Willow Creek hadn't changed as much as he'd hoped. Over the next few days, he felt the town's eyes on him, some curious, some hostile. At the grocery store, old classmates avoided his gaze. At the diner, whispers followed him. But there were bright spots too. A barista who smiled warmly, a teacher who thanked him for inspiring Lila's art. At home, the fragile truce with Robert grew. They worked on the radio again, and Robert shared stories of his treatment, his voice softer than Ethan remembered. One afternoon, Robert handed him a photo from the mantel, the one from the fishing trip. "Kept this up," he said gruffly. "Didn't want to forget." Ethan's eyes stung. "Thanks, Dad." But the progress was tested when Ethan got a call from Caleb, who'd been offered a job in New York. "It's a great opportunity," Caleb said, excitement in his voice. "But it means moving. I want us to decide together." Ethan's heart sank. New York was closer to Willow Creek, but it meant uprooting the life they'd built. He promised to talk it over, but the call left him restless. That night, he found Diane in the kitchen, washing dishes. "Something's on your mind," she said, drying her hands. "Talk to me." Ethan hesitated, then told her about Caleb's offer. "I don't know what to do, Mom. I love him, but coming back here it's made me realize how much I want to fix things with you all." Diane's eyes softened. "You don't have to choose, Ethan. You can have both, a life with Caleb and a family here. We're not going anywhere." Her words were a balm, but the decision weighed heavy. The next day, Ethan joined Lila at her school to see her mural. It was stunning, a vibrant collage of faces and moments, with Ethan's figure at the edge, his hand reaching toward the center. "You're part of us," Lila said, echoing her earlier words. "Always." Ethan hugged her, his heart full. But as they left the school, a group of teens loitered nearby, their laughter cutting off when they saw Ethan. One muttered something under his breath, and Ethan caught the word freak. He tensed, ready to walk away, but Lila spun around, furious. "Say it to his face," she shouted. "He's my brother, and he's twice the person you'll ever be." The teens scattered, and Ethan pulled Lila into a hug, his voice thick. "You don't have to fight my battles, kid." "I want to," she said fiercely. "You're worth it." That night, Ethan sat with Robert on the porch, the air cool and quiet. "Lila's tough," Ethan said. "She gets that from you." Robert chuckled, then coughed, his face pale. "She's got your heart, though. Always has." Ethan swallowed hard. "I'm thinking of moving closer. Caleb got a job offer in New York. It'd be easier to visit." Robert's eyes widened, then softened. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like to meet him. If he's important to you, he's family. The words were a gift, unexpected and precious. Ethan nodded, his throat too tight to speak. As the stars blinked above, he felt the first stirrings of a future where he could belong. Here, with Caleb, with all of them. The days blurred into a rhythm of small steps forward. Ethan helped Diane in the garden, laughed with Lila over old movies, and sat with Robert during quiet moments in the garage. Each conversation, each shared glance, was a brick in a bridge they were slowly rebuilding. But the town's judgment lingered, a shadow Ethan couldn't shake. One morning, he found a note slipped under the door, an anonymous scrawl calling him an outsider who didn't belong. Lila wanted to burn it, but Ethan tucked it away, his jaw tight. "It's just words," he said, but they cut deeper than he admitted. That afternoon, he drove to the local library, needing a break. The librarian, a kind woman named Sarah, recognized him from high school. "You've done well for yourself," she said, handing him a coffee. "Don't let this town drag you down." Her words stayed with him as he wandered the stacks, pulling out a book on art history for Lila. When he returned home, he found Robert waiting in the living room, a box on the coffee table. "Found this in the attic," Robert said, his voice gruff. "Thought you should have it." Ethan opened the box, his breath catching. Inside were his old sketchbooks, letters he'd written to his parents but never sent, and a photo of him and Robert at a baseball game, both smiling. "You kept all this?" Robert nodded. "Couldn't throw it out. Even when I was angry." Ethan's eyes burned. "I thought you hated me." "Never," Robert said, his voice breaking. "I was scared, Ethan. Scared of losing you, of not understanding. But I never hated you." The confession cracked something open in Ethan. He hugged his father, the first real hug in years, and felt the weight of their past shift, not gone but lighter. When Diane and Lila joined them, the room felt fuller, warmer, like a home again. But the town's hostility flared again at a community meeting Ethan attended with Diane. The topic was a new park, but whispers about outsiders and values filled the room. When Ethan stood to speak, suggesting inclusive signage, a man in the back shouted, "We don't need your kind here." The room went silent. Ethan's heart pounded, but before he could respond, Robert stood, his cane shaking in his hand. "That's my son," he said, his voice steady despite his frailty. "And he's got more right to be here than you ever will." Diane squeezed Ethan's hand, and Lila glared at the man, who slunk back in his seat. The moment was small but seismic, a public stand Ethan hadn't expected. As they left, strangers approached, some to argue, but others to thank Robert, to shake Ethan's hand. Change was slow, but it was there. That night, Ethan called Caleb, his decision clear. "Let's take the New York job," he said. "I want to be closer to my family, and I want you to meet them." Caleb's voice was warm. "I'm in. Let's do this." As Ethan hung up, he felt a weight lift. The locks on the door might have changed, but the ones around his heart were starting to open. Weeks later, Ethan stood at the airport, his bags packed for New York. Lila clung to him, her eyes wet. "You'll come back, right?" she asked. "Promise," Ethan said, hugging her tight. "And you're visiting us soon. Caleb's dying to see your mural." Diane hugged him next, her voice soft. "We're proud of you, Ethan. Always have been." Robert was last, his handshake firm despite his weakened frame. "Bring Caleb next time," he said. "I want to meet the man who makes you happy." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I will, Dad." The drive to the airport was quiet, the Pennsylvania hills rolling past. Ethan thought of the locks, the whispers, the years of silence. They hadn't vanished, but they'd faded against the warmth of his family's efforts, their imperfect but earnest attempts to rebuild. In New York, Caleb was waiting, his smile brighter than the city lights. They moved into a small apartment, a new chapter unfolding. Ethan hung Lila's sketches on the wall, a reminder of home. When his family visited months later, Robert shook Caleb's hand, and Diane pulled him into a hug. Lila, true to form, teased Caleb mercilessly, and the laughter filled the room. The locks had changed, but so had they all. Ethan had left Willow Creek broken, but he'd returned to find a family willing to try, a town slowly shifting, and a love that grounded him. As he stood with Caleb, Watching his family laugh together, he knew he'd found something stronger than any lock. Home, not just in a place, but in the people who held his heart.